guest tonight is going to be Mr. Lloyd Pye. He's the author of the book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, Origins of Life in Humans. I appreciate you so much for coming on to the show here tonight.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I hope that the audience enjoys the information that they're going to learn.
Can you tell the listeners who might not know exactly who you are a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been researching and studying in the field of alternative knowledge for about 40 years now, so it's been quite a while. And over the years, I've specialized in the origins of everything, really, the origins of life, the origins of humans, what the true story is about how humans came to be on Earth, how life came to be on Earth. And I'm one of the people who speaks in favor of what's called the intervention theory, which stands opposed to both Darwinism and Darwinian evolution. We feel that's wrong, as well as creationism and intelligent design. We feel that's wrong. If either of those two were right in all the time that they've had, one or the other would have prevailed. The fact that they are constantly picking at each other, warring at each other, and really scoring good points against each other shows you that they're both wrong.
Right.
And there is a middle ground. The truth is going to lie between the middle of Darwinian evolution and intelligent design, creationism, whatever you want to call it. And we think it's intervention theory, and I'm convinced that it is. I think the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of the idea that there has been intervention on Earth, but not from God with a capital G, but with gods with a small g, living, breathing beings of some kind or other who came to Earth, lived on Earth for quite some time, left all kinds of traces of their civilization here, their fingerprints, as it were, and also they created certain life forms here to make their life easy while they were here, and I think that includes human beings, but it's also all domesticated plants and animals are here because they were genetically engineered to be here, and we were genetically engineered to be a slave servant species for these people, and then when they left, they just left us sort of in charge. That's the way the intervention people see it.
I completely agree with this theory myself. In fact, I've said it on the show here in the past that I do believe that there is a middle ground between creationism and evolution, and that middle ground that will kind of merge the two together, has to be the correct one, because neither one has proven, like you said, that they're right over the other one. But the amazing thing is, your work correlates a lot to even stuff in the Bible that people want to look into the Bible. The Bible, remember, it's a work of historical records, in a sense, in story form. And a lot of that actually correlates to your knowledge and to what you're teaching. Also, it correlates a lot to the Anunnaki and the Sumerian texts. Now, do you believe the beings they created us were the Anunnaki? Do you believe that's exactly
I think that's the most likely prospect right now. Obviously, you can look at the different races and you can argue that other beings came at different times and perhaps created the different races. I don't really subscribe to that. I think that humans are fundamentally one core species, and that the different races came about as probably more likely due to isolated breeding populations and microevolutions within those. But you still can make the argument that, well, okay, the Anunnaki didn't do it alone, or even that they didn't even do it, that it was somebody before them, different than them. It doesn't really matter who did it. What matters is that the handiwork, the signs of the handiwork, are replete within our genome, so that we can see where the tampering was done in many places. And while science says, well, those things can happen in the real world, they can't really. And when they show the examples, they'll always be in domesticated plants and animals, because they're showing the same handiwork, same signs of the same handiwork that created us. So while it has happened in more than one species that you have obvious signs of genetic tampering, it always is not. It's not accidental. It's not natural, and it's not accidental. It is done on purpose to create a desired effect, and I think that history and time and study is going to show that and prove it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you also mentioned in one of your lectures that the human genome or the human DNA has over 4,000 defects or deformities in the actual DNA itself. That really blew me away because it makes perfect sense, and at least in my mind, it makes perfect sense that throughout mankind's history, as long as we've been here, to have this many deformities, it has to be just mistakes done when they were trying to create us.
Exactly.
Because there's no way this could have happened on time period that we've been on this planet.
Right. Well, that's part of the genetic proof that we are a manufactured, created species. If you listen to mainstream scientists, they've always believed that we diverged from a common ancestor with chimps and with other higher primates, but with chimps specifically, we had a common ancestor somewhere between 5 million years and 8 million years ago. According to the fossil record, the way the mainstream scientists tell us, that has to be the case. But in reality, our genes, our genes say when you go with the studying of the mitochondrial DNA, our genes say that we are only about 200,000 years ago, instead of not 8 million, not 5 million, 200,000, which is like yesterday by comparison to what it ought to be. So something's really wrong there, and there was a lot of debate between the geneticists and the anthropologists and archaeologists for quite some time once the first of the genetic tests were in, but now there have been so many tests that they don't even argue about it anymore. What they've come up with is the idea of a genetic bottleneck at about 200,000 years ago, in which most human beings die out some kind of way, and instead of us being a species created at that point, we are a species that sort of begins our second existence at that point, after most of us are killed off or die off in some way. Now there's no evidence for this, but it's the only way they can explain the sudden appearance of us as we are, and the incredible similarity that we all have genetically. We are all 99.99% the same, whereas you can look at a standard troop of inbred chimps or a standard troop of inbred gorillas, and they will have vastly more genetic difference between any two members of that group than between any two human beings you can find on the face of the earth. So that shows you right there that we're not a natural species and that we didn't develop in a natural way. But then you have, as you said earlier, the 4,000 genetic defects, 4,000 plus, we got more than 4,000, in a species that's only about 200,000 years old as we are today, as we are now. That's impossible. I mean, it's beyond impossible, because those same chimps and gorillas that we're talking about, they only have like a few hundred genetic defects, and none of them kill them before they reach the age of being able to reproduce. In other words, to continue that flaw into the gene pool and keep it going, you have to be able to, if you carry it, to reach the age of where you can pass it on. And we human beings have a couple of dozen of these defects that kill us dead before we reach the age of puberty. So how do those get in there? How are those in the gene pool, all over the gene pool, throughout the gene pool? It means that they started at the beginning of us, and they started because we were genetically engineered, and all of those things came when we were being produced, and they came as a result of mistakes, and the people that were creating us didn't care that they were making mistakes. They were creating slaves and servants, and why would they bother to make those perfect? They were working to dumb us down, to not give us, we had their brains, but they didn't want us to be as smart as they were, so they dumbed us down, and they put some kind of shield in our brain so that we get to use only a very small portion of what's in our heads. And we know this because of all the research that's been done with savants, people like Rain Man. All those savants, those 100+ savants that we've studied carefully, show that all the different skills that they have, whether it be with words or music or sculpture or art or whatever their skill is, they are reaching into a part of their brain, their human brain, and reaching into the part that's blocked off from normal people. And they get access to that because they have damage to their normal part. In other words, those are not normal people. And in the damage that creates a savant, they get a glimpse into the part of their brain that is blocked off from us. But it shows you what the kind of intellectual firepower that we could harness if we could drop the shield, drop the barrier, drop whatever it is that got put into our brains by those creating us, so we wouldn't be as smart as they are. We have their brains. We have the Anunnaki brain, or whoever created us. I believe it was the Anunnaki, but we have their brain. We have an extremely powerful brain in our heads, and we can only use a small portion of it because they were creating a slave and a servant. They didn't want somebody that could challenge them intellectually. They wanted somebody to be smart enough to take instructions, to go off and do what they were told to do, to come back and say, okay, boss, we finished that. What do you want us to do now? And,
Right.
That's what we are.
And it's funny, a lot of people say, well, how come these aliens or these beings are making these mistakes? Well, when we were trying to, clone Dolly the sheep, we made a ton of mistakes.
Oh, absolutely.
And mistakes happen. Doesn't mean just because they're, much more advanced.
Well, look at what you're, look at the size of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's so incredibly microscopic in size. And look at how tightly wadded up the genes are, coiled up inside the nucleus of the cells. So to get in there and cut with great precision using chemicals, that's how we do it with chemicals. We can assume they do it as well. They're just going to be mistakes, and there are going to be little things that go wrong. But if they don't, if they produce a functioning copy, you don't care if 1 out of 100 dies. Do you care? If 1 out of 10 dies, do you care? No, you're making a slave and a servant. It doesn't mean anything to you. So as long as you've got functional copies coming out that are going to work for you, you don't care how many faulty copies are coming out because it's not your concern. So that's why, and it's clear, at least from the records that the Sumerians talk about in their texts, this was a crash program. They had to have them done yesterday. The people that they were building them for were revolting, and they had real problems. The Anunnaki had real problems, and we were the solution to a real internal battle that they were having, and it was absolutely get it done yesterday. And that's why we have so many flaws. They just didn't care about the kind of creature they were creating. They just wanted something that would work, and that's what they got.
Yeah, and to put it a little bit in a comical reference here, if you guys want to kind of take a look at even movies that we have, like Star Wars, for example, they use the clone troopers in the new trilogy that came out. If you notice in the movie, they're disposable. They were created for a reason, and they're disposable in the movie. They will get killed. Doesn't mean anything to the creators. The creators didn't care because they really were there just to serve a purpose, like we were created to serve a purpose. And of course, a lot of the teachings that I've read about the Anunnaki is that the reason they used us for slave labor was to mine for gold. Is this particularly the main reason you believe that they were creating us was really just for mining for gold?
Yes,
for their
I do
atmosphere?
believe that. I do believe just pretty much the story that Sitchin tells from his interpretation of the Anunnaki, of the Sumerian texts about the Anunnaki makes sense to me. Now, it may not be entirely true. There may not be a word of it that's true. But I can tell you for a fact the traces of the handiwork are in our genes. You can see that. You can see it in domesticated plants. You can see it in domesticated animals. So you've got a people leaving a written record saying, we know who did this, and we know how it was done. Here's how it was done, and here's where it was done, and here's when it was done. And, that was written, those tablets were written, let's say 5,000 years ago, in that range. So here's these tablets saying we built these creatures, the Adamu, around 200,000 years ago. And we built them in South Africa to be slaves and servants and to mine gold. And lo and behold, in our own time in 1986, 87, we discover that sure enough, we are only about 200,000 years old. And sure enough, the oldest of us do come from Southern Africa. And sure enough, there are old ancient gold, mines down there, and the assumption is gold because that's where gold country is. So you've got everything that was being described 5,000 years ago in these clay tablets that have, of course, been fired into stone. You have all those things found out to be true here in modern times. Now, what are the odds? What a freaking coincidence is that you'd have all three of those things that they claimed 5,000 years ago pan out right now in our own modern times. You have to respect that. You have to take that really seriously.
No, it's incredible. And in fact, I was getting a question here from the chat that I'm gonna shoot your way real quick.
Sure.
This is coming from Will, and he says he wants to know. He wonders if at the time could man even actually understand or use the brain in full that they were given, the ability to do so, or because of the simple fact that really it's kind of a clone of human and alien brain. Do you think that even if they would allow us to use the entire percentage of our brain, would we actually have been able to get to that point that we could actually use the entire percentage of our brain, or what would be the other reasons for them locking that percentage out? I guess is his question.
Okay. Well, let me see if let me say this and see if you think this answers the question. Probably the original Adamu that they created, the original Adamu, the black-headed ones, as they called them, were probably not as smart as we are today, collectively, because not only did they create us to be slaves and servants, they created us to provide feminine companionship for the males who dominated the group that was here. Every army in the world knows you got to have the whorehouses nearby, or you're going to have problems with your men, over time. And so basically, that was another thing that they were doing. They were creating women for their purposes. Well, out of that came what were called demigods, mm-hmm. which were hybrids between the Anunnaki and the Adamu. And over time, they produced a lot of those. And I would imagine that the demigods, being I would think substantially smarter, still not anywhere near the Anunnaki themselves. I think more like us. Now, this is just spitballing. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm just saying I think probably we, you and me and everybody listening to this, us collectively as a whole today, are smarter than the Anunnaki intended for us to be.
Right.
Because of the hybridization program that produced the demigods. I think basically we're all the result of demigods rather than the original Adamu. That's how I see it. I think the Adamu were not sharp enough to carry on. I think they were just really basic worker types, and that because demigods started being produced at the level that we were, that threw a wrench in their plans, because really they could have created a worker like animal almost, and when they were ready to leave, just gotten rid of them. But because a lot of their children were here when it became time for them to leave, they might have said, well, I don't want to really kill them all. Let's turn the place over to them and see what they can do with it. And
let the apes run the asylum, in other words.
Say again?
Let the apes run the asylum.
Yeah, let the wackos, let the crazies run the asylum, basically.
Exactly,
right, yeah. So, I mean, that's a possibility, and that's how I lean, but I don't have any real substantial proof for that right now.
Now, do you think if mankind today were able to use, the entire part of their brain. Would you equivalent that to like people that are enlightened or psychic? Do you think these people are using more of their brain?
Yeah, I do think people like, geniuses. Let's talk about genius rather than, say, psychic abilities. A guy like Einstein, Michelangelo, Leonardo, people like that, those are all slightly abnormal people in real life. I mean, anybody that knew him, knows him, will say, that's a strange dude. But he's a genius. So what I think is, rather than having the total savant effect, where you have real, true, serious damage to the normal part of a person's brain, but it gives you a full, clear insight into some other aspect of genius that creates a savant. With a person that's a genius like Einstein or like Michelangelo or Leonardo or genius of that level,
right?
There's a bulge into the area, the forbidden area. It's not a slice through the curtain, but it's a bulge into that area, and that bulge is there because you're a little bit not right, but you're okay. You're right enough to function and be considered, quasi-normal. That's what I think genius really is. It's a bulging rather than a tear in the curtain. And so instead of losing your full functionality as a normal person, you retain most of it, but not all of it. And the trade-off for that, for you being a strange, weird, goofy kind of person, is you get that extra gift of intelligence that comes from the bulge into the forbidden zone of your brain.
That makes sense. And as we evolve, you're going to see more and more people like this. How did you come into possession of the Starchild skull? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the Starchild skull is a fascinating subject, as you said earlier in the introduction. It is a real, true bone skull. There's no question about it. That looks human-like. It has the human basic outline, but no single part of it, not a single part of it, is exactly human. It's totally different in every single individual aspect. You can't name a part of a normal human skull that has an exact corollary in the Starchild. It is totally and completely different. And it came to me in early 1999. It was found in 1930 by a woman in Mexico. And it was found in a cave, and she assumed it was a deformity, just a deformed human. I mean, what would you assume in 1930? That it was just, okay, there's no UFOs, there's no aliens, there's none of that, so it's just a deformity. And so she kept it as a kind of a souvenir of finding it in the cave. And there's a long, drawn-out story behind all that I'm saying here, and I would urge people to get copies of either the e-book or the book, and or go to the website starchildproject.com and familiarize yourself with it, because there are many, many facts to back up everything that I'm telling you here. So from the 1930 finding until the late 90s, it was in the possession of people who just assumed it was a defect. But then it came into the possession of a young woman a young couple in El Paso, Texas, named Ray and Melanie Young. And Melanie had been a neonatal nurse, and she knew right away that wasn't a deformity, because it was entirely too light, number one, and it was entirely too symmetrical, number two. Deformity is generally not very symmetrical. It's not very attractive looking. Though this is a very strange looking skull, it's really beautifully put together. So she felt, and then on top of that, she and Ray were members of the El Paso MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, so they were very familiar with UFO lore and alien lore. And so they looked at each other and said, this skull looks like it would fit in the head of a gray perfectly, because it had all of the physical hallmarks that a gray alien would have.
Yes.
It has the expanded parietals. It had the crease in the top. It had the very narrow, strictured lower face, the heart-shaped face. The people who see gray say they have a heart-shaped face. Well, this thing had this skull produced a heart-shaped face, and so they thought that it could well be the skull of a gray alien, pure gray alien. So they called me in on it, and then they asked me what I thought, and I said, well, I don't think it's, that it's a gray. It could be, but I don't think it's likely that it is. I think it's much more likely that it's a deformity of some kind, because in early 1999, I'm not going to sit there and think I'm holding the skull of an alien. I'm going to think I'm holding the skull of some kind of a deformity. I mean, it didn't make sense. But as I took it out for that year, I mean, I thought it would be that science would find out how dramatically different it was, and they would jump on it and take it away and start testing it within 6 months. And here I am in my 11th year talking to you about it.
Yeah.
So it shows you how science really runs in the other direction when they see it coming. They're just so terrified by what it means, and I don't blame them. It means a radical change in the way they have to look at the world, and they just don't want to do it unless somebody makes them. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to hold their feet to the fire and make them do it. So anyway, the what I found out in the first year was very clearly, this is not a human being. This is not a deformed human. This is something else. I didn't know what, but I knew it wasn't a standard human, because by the end of that year and the end of the testing and talking to the different specialists that would talk to me and tell me things about it, it was clear that this was not any kind of a deformity. It wasn't a deformity anybody could put a name to. There was no combination of deformities that would produce this thing. This was utterly and completely and totally different. I knew that by the end of '99, but I had to prove it. I mean, you can just, you can know something and you can prove a bunch of physical things about it. But a guy, one of the scientists that I talked to and who got a little annoyed with me for pushing him into, like, this thing's really weird. You've never seen anything like it. He said, look, I don't care if you stack up 10,000 physiological differences. I can say to you that nature is capable of doing that, because in science, nature is capable of everything. I mean, we were talking earlier about the differences between Darwinism and creationism, and it's really just that simple. Creationists say that an all-powerful God with a capital G creates everything, and science says an all-powerful nature with a capital N creates everything, and it's just, that's their two stalwarts that they hide behind. And so with nature, the way science has it set up, nature can do absolutely anything. The only thing nature can't do is fiddle with DNA. So the guy said, I'm not going to buy into any of this until I see some DNA. Till the DNA tells the tale. The DNA will do it. And so it's been really pretty much a war to get proper DNA testing done since late '99, and we had a test then, and it didn't work. They weren't capable of the lab that did it was not capable of dealing
I heard about
with
that. Yeah.
with the ancient DNA, and then we had it done in 2003, and then we got a result that we knew. That result told us that it was the mother was human and the father wasn't, and that the two skulls, the two bodies found in the cave, in the mine tunnel, were not genetically related, so they weren't mother and child as we had thought for a long time. So now we're in a position of being able to prove, because there is a test now that allows us to do this, to prove beyond any shadow of scientific doubt. And this, you said it earlier in your intro that this is one of the most important things in the world, and it really is. And this is why. Because there is now a DNA test available. It's being applied to the Neanderthal as we speak, but it allows for the recovery of the entire genome of an unknown creature. And that recovery is going to allow us to take the Starchild's DNA, its total DNA package, and recover it, and then compare it to a human being and a chimp and a gorilla and a Neanderthal, for that matter. And we will be able to say with great precision, exactly how far away from human the Starchild was. And there's no doubt that it's not human, because you have at least 25 major physiological differences from a human, and several more sort of minor differences. All of those differences require different DNA, require different genetic instructions. So when you extrapolate just what's visible in the head down through the rest of the body, which wasn't there, but if you've got that much going on different in the skull, and then extrapolate that through the body, you don't have anything close to a human being. So you've got an alien. You were looking at an alien. Everybody really that studies this, anybody that gets the ebook and reads it, or gets the book and reads it, coming out of those things that this really is it. This really is the smoking gun of UFO and alien research. It's just sitting right here, ready to go, ready to prove itself. All we need is the money to pay for this test, but this test is very expensive, about $250,000.
Wow.
No, $250,000. It takes 3 to 4 months. But understand, though, Jackal, what we're talking about. We're talking about roughly 3 billion with a B base pairs that have to be recovered. So that's 3 or 4 months of just machines running like crazy, 24/7, just sequencing, getting those base pairs lined up. But once it's all done, it's done, and we have made history as big as history can be made. I mean, no question about it.
Now, let me ask you a question, Mr. Pye. The Starchild, do you believe that this being was, I guess, connected to the Anunnaki directly, or do you think it was a gray alien, that maybe like a worker alien left behind? Because I've heard the comparison to a machine, or that it could have been maybe part of a robot or something like that, which a lot of people who follow the Greys and the stories of the Greys tend to believe also that they might actually be some sort of robot or some sort of a machine left behind by the Anunnaki. Do you think this is what this being might have been?
No, I don't think that, because this is not a purebred anything. This is a hybrid with a human mother and an alien father. Now, when I say that, I don't want people to mistakenly think that it's a product of a sexual union, so that it's going to have a lot of traits of its mother and a lot of traits of its father mixed in. A normal hybrid, you get something in the range of 60-40 or 30-70, 70% one parent, 30% the other. Just as when you have a normal sexual union, you and your siblings are not quite the same. Sometimes one of you will take more after your mother, one of you take more after your father. It's just, that's all a matter of luck. The Starchild is a product of a laboratory of in vitro fertilization, in which the female egg is cored out of all of its DNA, and you maintain its cytoplasm and its cover, its cell wall. So that's where your mitochondrial DNA comes from. But the nuclear DNA that gets put into that egg has been completely designed by whatever species is making this new species, these hybrids, and it could be 90% dad and 10% mom. It could be 95% dad and 5% mom. And I think that's what the Starchild really is. It is a product engineered to be almost entirely the father. Very little evidence of the mother is physiologically there, but the mitochondrial DNA all comes from the mother. That's what mitochondrial DNA does. It comes from the female line. So while the mother contributed all of the Starchild's mitochondrial DNA, I doubt if she contributed 5%, 10% at the most, because she doesn't show up in its physical traits, if you see what I'm saying.
Right, no, I got you. The reason I said that is because it does look a lot like what a typical gray would resemble, and of course I've heard the stories before that the Greys might actually have been biological machines in a sense, left here to spy on us.
Right.
But
you look at the alien autopsy, and it doesn't look that way. So
it doesn't at all.
I'm thinking they're more likely a living kind of entity and not really a robot. The reason people say that they're robots is they seem to be unfeeling in the human way, and I do think that's true. I don't think they have emotions of the kinds that we have. And that's why they come off as robotic. And I don't, there are other reasons probably that contribute to that. They're so different. They're so weird looking. People are terrified when they're dealing with them. All of that. But I don't think they're actually physical robots. I think they're probably living, breathing beings of some kind.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, but to them, I'm sure we look pretty weird also. But listen, I have a caller on the line here, Osmond, who wants to get a question in real quick. Are you okay with taking a call real quick?
No, go right ahead.
Hello, Lloyd. This is Rick Osmond. How you doing?
Hey, Rick. How you doing? Oh, this is not a setup. We didn't plan this.
No.
Lloyd's been on my show and been on my mailing list for, years now, I guess.
Yep. Wrote you something just today.
Yep, and I got it, and I appreciate that. My question goes back to the earlier discussion, and I can only stay a couple minutes, but the question is, back there 200,000 or 160,000, depending on which version you believe.
Right.
The DNA differentiation scales that they're using today says that there were only about somewhere between 70 and 20,000 humans alive at that time.
Right.
20 would be a mighty small slave force for a mine. 70,000, 20,000, whatever, would be reasonable. What have you found along those lines? I mean, obviously there was a lot more mining going on than in just South Africa.
Well, I tell you, Rick, you may have seen the thing that was going around 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I so many people have seen it. It's called Adam's Calendar, the new book.
Right.
Yeah, by the guy out of South Africa. And in that book, can you think of his name right now?
No, it escapes me.
Yeah, me too. I'm just drawing a blank for some reason, but I know his name as well as I know yours, but I'm not pulling up. Maybe I will as I talk. But anyway, it has to do with discoveries that they've made on the ground in southern Africa that show that they had a population as much as 1 million down there. As far back as 200,000 years ago. Now the problem there is obvious. Science can't accept that as even remotely possible, and yet they're finding what looks to be on the ground evidence of human hands building walls, and in many places these circular type compounds that nobody's quite sure of what they are. Many of them are probably animal pens and things like that. But nonetheless, there looks to be evidence of civilization spread over as much as 10,000 square miles of southern Africa with mines all over the place. So the idea of the 20,000 to the 70,000 is not really matching up with what seems to be on the ground down there. So somebody's, like, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Somebody's got some splaining to do, and it's just who's going to come out of that with what is believed by the majority of people. Science sits in the catbird seat, and they hold all the power because they control the medium. But that doesn't make them right. Over time, the truth tends to come out over time. And I'm feeling pretty comfortable that we're on the side of truth right now, and that science is just going to end up with a really big black eye somewhere down the line. But, they live with a black eye. I mean, science is just one long series of corrected mistakes. Those guys are numbnuts. And it's unfortunate, but they get locked in to their training and their brainwashing, and they're not allowed to think creatively because they can't move the mark forward more than a fraction of an inch, or they disjoint all of their colleagues and their peers, and they won't allow it. The really big jumps in vision and in perception always come from outsiders, people who aren't really members of the fraternity. Darwin wasn't a member of the fraternity till he did what he did. Einstein wasn't a member of the fraternity until he did what he did. And it goes on and on. The big jumps come from outside the camp, because if you're in the camp, your brain has already been shut down in the process of getting you in to be a member of the camp.
Yeah, that's why we call it doctrinal. Well, Lloyd, I have to go, but I sure appreciate you addressing that question. I hope to talk to you soon.
Well, I hope the answer was what you were looking for, and yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch, Rick.
Okay.
Thanks. Rick. Thank you, Rick, for calling, man. You're awesome.
I'll talk to you all later. Good night.
All right, brother. Jamie, I know you're still on the line here with us.
Yeah.
I had a question for Lloyd.
Yeah, one thing that hit me when I had Lloyd on my show is when you talked about the cerebellum. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the importance of that to the listeners?
Sure. The Starchild's skull, if you go on the website or get into the books or whatever, but the website's easier to way to go right now, and look at the skull and you see its profile, you see how steeply the rear of it slants downward. Very, very different than a human being. A human has a curve in the back. We all have a curve in the back of our heads as our skull connects in with our neck. And in that area right back there, if you reach around and you feel that knot, we all have a knot in the rear lower part of our head, the center of it. That's called the inion. It's a slang term. It's called actually the external occipital protuberance. It's a protuberance off of the occipital bone. There is a corollary to it on the inside. If you stick your finger inside a skull, you'll feel a knob on the inside, and that's the internal occipital protuberance. So that is there as part of a scaffolding arrangement inside your skull to brace your cerebellum in place. Now, your cerebellum, most people don't understand. It's about the size of a softball. It's about 10% of the brain. It's about 10% of the physical volume of your brain. Everything's sitting on top of it, the cortex, neocortex, all that. That's where you think. That's where you do your reasoning. That's you, pretty much. But your cerebellum is where all your motors are, all the things that run you, the things that make you, your breathing, your blood moving through your body, your cells all changing themselves out and healing themselves, and everything that goes on that you're not aware of, that's you. And you have about, it's only 10% of the size of your brain, it has about 80% of the neurons in there. 80%. Like you have about 1 million neurons to run your eyes. 1 million. You have like 200 million neurons in the cerebellum. It's hugely, hugely important, right? So you can't have anything go wrong with it. So you've got all that 3 pounds of weight sitting up on top of it, pressing down on it in the rear. So in a human being, it's nestled in that curve back there, and the thickest bone in the skull protects it, and then on top of that, you have your neck layered over that. It's very well protected because it has to be. But it sits right down at your neck hole, at the hole in your skull where your spine has to come in. So there's a hole there. So that your cerebellum is not squeezed out of the hole from the pressure of the weight of the rest of the brain up there, it has these little flanges of bone that are like to hold it into place, and it's sitting in that curve. So it's resting. It's a good design to take care of the cerebellum, because when a person has hydrocephaly, they have water on the brain and they have that internal pressure. That's what kills them. The push comes, when the push comes, your cerebellum will squeeze out. It'll also expand your head, of course, as well, but eventually what gets you is your cerebellum screws up. So the Starchild's design is completely different from that. its brain is set up, as you see from that slant, there's no curve there to protect it, to hold it in place. And the way the thing is squashed forward, it sits right on top of the hole, right on top of the hole. And you've got all this extra weight of brain. The Starchild has a much bigger brain than a normal human does. In the parietals, that's the upper rear part that's expanded. So you have all this extra weight pressing straight down on a cerebellum that doesn't have those bracing flanges inside. So when a brain specialist first saw it and started fooling around with it, and he just looked at me when he was through and he said, look, this thing probably doesn't have a brain the way we have a brain, because whatever it's got in there, the material has to be so much harder and firmer than our brain, because it would just come oozing right out the hole the way this is designed. So it either has a completely different material of the brain that we have, or it doesn't have a cerebellum the way we have a cerebellum. This brain in here is completely different from a human brain. And to me, that's still very impressive, and I'm not surprised that Jamie would be impressed by it, because it is one of the major, and like I said, there are 25, but it's one of those 25 really major differences about the Starchild and a normal human.
No, yeah, it's incredible. That alone tells you, right, that you're not dealing with a retarded kid or something like that. You're definitely dealing with something that's completely out of this world as we know it.
Right. If we had only that, we would be looking at something very special. But we've got so many other things. You know, the bone itself. I mean, let's just for a minute briefly talk about the bone. The Starchild's bone is half as thick as normal human bone. It weighs half as much. It's 2 or 3 times as hard. Because why? Its bone chemistry is completely different. It's more like tooth enamel than human bone. It's more like the hardest bone in the human body, but all over, you know. And then it's got fibers woven through its matrix to increase its strength. Those fibers are not found in any other animal on Earth. There are so many things about the Starchild that just in and of themselves scream out that this is not a human being. You know,
that part alone is fascinating. The fact that it has fibers interwoven in the bone itself, and it's harder than human skull, and it's actually thinner, lighter, but yet it's stronger.
Absolutely.
And this even makes sense, you know, with our own DNA. If you want to believe in evolution, you know, why are we weaker than apes, for example? They're much stronger than we are.
Right.
It almost does look like we were not only dumbed down, but we were made weaker on purpose.
Well, we have Anunnaki bodies. I mean, that's basically it. But they took what they call the creature of Earth. Now, we can get into hominoids for the last few minutes of the show here real quick. Hominoids are Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, and yeti, and 2 other kinds that exist out there around the world that most people don't even know about. But those are the natural, upright walking, indigenous creatures of planet Earth. They exist now, they existed then, they exist going back through the Miocene apes back to 25 million years ago. All right, the evidence of that is clear. A new book called the Upright Ape gives fantastic evidence for that. But the long and the short is that with the human, there is that evidence of the hominoids being real. So we're clearly add-ons to the planet here. And geez, one of the rare times I forgot my train of thought here. I can't remember the point I was starting off with. But anyway, the hominoids are there, and they're another part of it, and they are that. Oh, that's it, and that's what they used, the creatures of Earth. That's it. So the Anunnaki said, we shall use the creature of Earth and mix our own essence with that to create this new thing. Well, the new thing is much more like them than it is the creature of Earth. In the same way that the Starchild is very little like a human being, but it's still an alien-human hybrid, the Adamu are very little like the creature of Earth, but they are a hybrid creature with the creature of Earth, and and the Anunnaki.
Here's a hypothetical for you. Do you think that maybe they did this on purpose to keep us trapped here on Earth, besides the fact they want to use it as labor, or slave labor, but do you think that maybe they wanted it to make us so that we can't be a space-faring race because, we're physically not a race that is able to, to go fast, past the speed of light or anything like that? We just physically can't do it. Our bodies can't do it.
Yeah, I don't know that figures into it, Jackal, for this reason. We are right now so abysmally stupid when it comes to the realities of the world. That's why I call my book Everything You Know Is Wrong. We are we're abysmally ignorant. So this thing about the speed of light that everybody's hung up on, like, you can't go any faster than that, so, that, forget it. That isn't even a problem for people that are spacefarers. You can't even think about going around in the universe or even in the solar system, really, but particularly in the universe, until you've beaten the speed of light problem. So whatever the answer to that is, that answer is out there for us to get at some point if we stay alive that long. But part of what's wrong with science is, and part of what people like me do, is we're trying to force science to get on the right track. As long as they stay on the wrong tracks that they're on, about black holes and the Big Bang and dark matter and dark energy, that is the biggest bunch of malarkey you can imagine. Gravity is not the center of what makes it all happen. It's electricity. Electricity is so much stronger than gravity, but science will not give up gravity because they don't want to give up Newton. They don't want to give up Einstein. They don't want to go back to the drawing board. They don't want to get on the right track. Until they give up the wrong track of gravity, they can't begin to get on the right track of electricity. And once we begin to really master the subtleties of plasma, the plasma that's out there, and start learning how to travel through the Birkeland currents and things like that, then we can think about, wormholes, jumping dimensions, going in and out of realities, becoming invisible, all the things that UFOs are said to do. We can learn how to do that, but we will never learn it until we acknowledge that it's out there to learn. You see what I mean? How can you learn something you won't acknowledge is out there to learn? And that's where our science is right now. Right. Really, we're Stone Age level. For all as smart as we think we are Stone Age level compared to the truth that's out there.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, to quote one of the probably one of the best scientists out right now, Michio Kaku, where he describes us as a Type 0 civilization. We haven't made that leap yet, and we might actually blow ourselves up before we make that leap to Type 1 civilization.
That's right. We are really a basket case. We're a poor copy or sample or whatever. I bet you when the Anunnaki look at us now, to the extent that they do, they just hang their heads and just they have to feel really sorry for us and for creating us as poorly as they did, and for leaving us in the shape that we're in emotionally and psychologically and all that, because we're just a mess. There are very few of us, I think, that have anything approaching the right attitude about how to get us into the future. And it's incumbent on those of us that have those ideas and that awareness to just work hard at it and try to overcome the great obstacles that are thrown into our paths by these people, because they have all the power right now. In the same way, look, it's no different than 150 years ago, in the middle 1800s, the religionists had all the power. Scientists were, at that time, the equivalent of the alternative people like me today. That's how scientists were then. Religion just controlled everything. Yep. But over time, science stuck with it, and they kept hammering away with fact after fact after fact, and eventually, as literacy, well, the printing press turned it around. You had the printing press, and then you had literacy, and then you had people who could think for themselves, see for themselves, figure it out for themselves, and logic led them away from religion toward science. Well, in the end, the Internet's going to do the same thing for us in the alternative field. It's going to allow us to communicate, to move facts around in a way that we've never been able to do before. Science has always controlled the media before. This they can't control. So more and more things like what you're doing with your radio show and what I'm doing, going on them, talking to people, telling them the truth about things, the word's going to get out. And over time, we're going to do to science what science did to religion. We will, our positions will win out and take over.
Like I said earlier, I appreciate you spending an hour here with us.
You guys have a good night. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasant hour, and I hope to talk to you again sometime.